श्री गुरु नमः। हरि ओम। कनिक्रदज्जलशं प्रगृहाणयतिमाच मरिदेव नामं सुमङ्गलश्च शकुने भवासिमान् भागाचेदपि भाविष्या विदत आत्माश्येन उद्बधी मासु कर्णो मातवा विदधिषु स्मीरो हस्ताम् विद्र्यामनुप्रतिक्रदत् सुमङ्गलो भद्रवादी परेहा अवक्रन्ददक्षिणतो गृहाणां सुमङ्गलो भद्रवादी शतमाघ्रशं सो भगवदेव विदते सुमीता। हरि। सभी को नमस्ते। जैसे कि हम सब जानते हैं, भारतीय ज्ञान परंपरा प्रकोष्ठ ये नॉलेज सिस्टम के द्वारा श्रृंखला के माध्यम से,
I think you have to adjust your sound because the sound is getting a kind of a rattling is there in the sound. Sanjeev?
जी सर, अभी आ रही
I
है ना
think
आवाज?
you got to set your sound again.
सभी को नमस्ते। भारतीय ज्ञान परंपरा प्रकोष्ठ इंडियन नॉलेज सिस्टम के द्वारा वेबिनार की श्रृंखला के माध्यम से हम भारत के गणमान्य विद्वानों को हम सुन पा रहे हैं। आज एक हम नया विषय को लेकर के हम आप सभी के सामने उपस्थित हैं। आज चर्चा करेंगे हम कॉन्सेप्ट एंड प्रैक्टिसेस ऑफ एनवायरमेंटल कंजर्वेशन इन एंशिएंट इंडिया, व्हाट कैन बी लर्न फ्रॉम देम। इस विषय पर प्रकाश डालने के लिए हमारे बीच में दो विद्वान लोग उपस्थित हैं। सर्वप्रथम मुख्य अतिथि के रूप में प्रोफेसर कपिल कपूर जी, चेयरमैन इंडियन इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ एडवांस स्टडीज शिमला, हमारे बीच में विद्यमान है। सर, आपका मैं हार्दिक स्वागत करता हूँ। इसी प्रकार इस कार्यक्रम में मुख्य वक्ता के रूप में हमारे बीच में विराजमान है प्रोफेसर मिशेल डेनिनो, सर आईआईटी गांधीनगर। सर, आपका भी हम हार्दिक स्वागत करते हैं। वी आर ऑनर्ड टू वेलकम यू सर। इसी प्रकार हमारे बीच में भारतीय ज्ञान परंपरा प्रकोष्ठ के मुख्य समन्वयक आदरणीय श्री आर्यभूषण शुक्ला जी विराजमान है। सर, आपका स्वागत है इस कार्यक्रम में। इस कार्यक्रम के यूट्यूब के माध्यम से बहुत सारे श्रोता लोग हैं, आप सभी का हम स्वागत करते हैं। तो इस कार्यक्रम में मैं अभी हमारे आदरणीय मुख्य अतिथि श्री कपिल कपूर जी का परिचय करने के लिए मैं स्वागत करता हूँ हमारे असिस्टेंट कोऑर्डिनेटर श्री जी। धन्यवाद जी। आज के हमारे इस कार्यक्रम में अपनी विशेष तथा आभान्वित उपस्थिति से हमारे बीच में उपस्थित प्रोफेसर कपिल कपूर जी, आप इंडियन इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ एडवांस स्टडीज शिमला के चेयरमैन हैं तथा इंडियन नॉलेज सिस्टम के मिशन मैनेजमेंट कमेटी के सदस्य भी। आपने स्कूल ऑफ लैंग्वेज लिटरेचर एंड कल्चरल स्टडीज JLUT आप रहे हैं तथा वहीं पर आप प्रो वाइस चांसलर भी रह चुके हैं। आपने एनसाइक्लोपीडिया ऑफ हिंदुइज्म के 11 खंडों के आप एडिटर इन चीफ थे। एनसाइक्लोपीडिया ऑफ इंडियन पोएटिक्स जो एक यूनेस्को का प्रोजेक्ट था, उसके भी आप एडिटर रहे हैं। इसके अलावा आयरिश एकेडमी ऑफ कल्चरल हेरिटेज, इंडियन काउंसिल ऑफ फिलोसॉफिकल रिसर्च, मॉनिटरिंग एंड प्लानिंग कमिटी ऑफ सेंट्रल यूनिवर्सिटी ऑफ हायर टिबेटन स्टडीज सारनाथ, एकेडमिक काउंसिल ऑफ सेंट्रल इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ इंग्लिश एंड फॉरेन लैंग्वेजेस हैदराबाद आदि अनेक संस्थाओं पर आपने बहुत सारे पदों को विभूषित किया है और आपके ज्ञान से सभी को मार्गदर्शन। इसके अलावा आपके द्वारा लैंग्वेज लिटरेचर एंड लिंग्विस्टिक्स द इंडियन पर्सपेक्टिव, टेक्स्ट एंड इंटरप्रिटेशन द इंडियन ट्रेडिशन, कंपैरेटिव लिटरेचर एंड ओवरव्यू आदि अनेक सहायक ग्रंथों और पुस्तकों का भी प्रकाशन हुआ है। लगभग 40 से अधिक छात्रों ने आपके मार्गदर्शन में PhD की है तथा 30 से अधिक छात्रों ने MPhil। आपका परिचय देते हुए मैं इतना ही कहूँगा, यस्तु संचरते देशान यस्तु सेवेत पंडिता तस्य विस्तारिता बुद्धि तैल बिंदु विभाग। इसी के साथ आपका स्वागत करते हुए मैं आपसे अनुरोध करता हूँ, कृपया अपने वाणी से सभी को
Am I supposed to speak first?
जी सर। यस सर।
Sanjeev, am I supposed to speak first? I thought I'll be asked to speak the last. I'll pick up some ideas from Daninoji and then speak. Anyways, I think now,
initiate the talk. As a keynote witness, you are chief guest.
all right. Thank you very much. Well, the subject is very well described in your title: concept and practices of environmental conservation in ancient India. What we learn from them. Most of the evidence we get of the environmental concerns in those days, we get from intellectual knowledge texts. In my various talks and lectures, I have argued and perhaps possibly convinced people that we don't have any sacred texts. We don't say Vedas are sacred texts and you cannot criticize them or you cannot disagree with them, but they are all knowledge texts. And it is from the knowledge texts that we get conservative ideas about different things, and among them, what we have as subject today, the environmental conservation. And the notion of concept. You see, the concept means that from what does this whole concern emerge? It emerges from a particular attitude to nature. As we are all aware, there are two knowledge cultures in the world. One is the Abrahamic, or you call it Semitic, or you call it Judaic. And it's a problematic case there because the three terms are all questioned by different people. But then we don't have any other way, fourth way to call it, unless you say Middle East knowledge culture. And we have the Vedic knowledge culture. There are only two knowledge cultures in the world. There is the Abrahamic, and Abrahamic has spawned three systems: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And Vedic has spawned four systems: Sanatan Dharma, Jaina, Buddha, and Sikh. And the fundamental difference between the two is that the Abrahamic system is theocentered, God-centered. God is the object of knowledge. God is the object of reverence. And everything, all thinking around human life begins with thinking about God. God is the master. He is the observer. He is the creator. And he is outside the creation. And he keeps watching how you perform and all that. And in that way of thinking, that since God is the one truth, everything else is the other. Everything else is the other. And nature also, nature is the other. So nature is a kind of an adversarial relationship with man, because as in the 16th century, Descartes said in his book on method that the goal of knowledge is to bend nature to man's purpose. Goal of knowledge is to bend nature to man's purpose. Now there is the essence of the attitude to nature, which comes from the original positing of theocentrism as the key to all human thinking and human activities. I have not mentioned Vedic because then we will be going into a long, but the Vedic thinking is not about God. It's not centered on God. It is about the human life, concern with human life, with the welfare of human beings. Lok Sangrah. Bhagavad Gita में 3 बार ये term use होती है. That is, all human activity must promote the welfare of the people. Lok Sangrah. And it is not God-centered at all. As you know, we don't have one personal God. We have a cafeteria approach to God, and we need not believe in one. We may believe in one, we may believe in two, Radhe Krishna or Sitaram, or we may believe in many. We have 51 Shakti Peethas, we have goddesses, and we may be in 33 Koti categories, 33 categories of gods, which are all representations of the same one primal force, which is called by Vedanta Brahman. So they are names given to various powers and potentials of that one force. So leaving it there, the otherness of nature in the Abrahamic system, and the nature is to be bent. You see, notice the word bent, to serve man's purpose. And they have bent it so much, they bended it so much that they had to set up departments of environment sciences and schools of environmental sciences in the universities. So characteristically, the Abrahamic tradition first breaks and then protects. You see, you first destroy and then you try to maintain. So in the same way, the Indian so-called, I hate that word modern, in that Indian modern thinking, when the Green Revolution took place, it didn't take much time for the Green Revolution to become a greed revolution and exploitation of the Mother Earth in such a way that in Punjab, where it mainly happened, at that time it was a united Punjab, mainly happened, you have a train running from Pathankot to Chandigarh, which is called Cancer Express. It is called Cancer Express because the water has been poisoned, the earth has been poisoned by chemicals and other things, and to produce more, to consume more, the whole goal is shift in the Indian philosophy from contentment to consumption, And in that process, I think we have learned something of the Western attitude towards nature. Otherwise, in the Indian point of view, the basic concept of nature is that nature is the mother. And we all live, we all flourish in the lap of the mother. And as you know, the earth, dharti, earth, in Yask's Nirukta, it has in that set of words which are so-called, not really, but there is no other word, synonyms for earth, for Prithvi. There are 22 words, and all of them have been threaded on the notion of patience, dharya. You see, because the earth is the epitome of dharya. इतना बोझ उठाती है गलत और ठीक व्यक्तियों का, गलत और ठीक चीजों का. So the earth, Mother Earth. So in the morning, when a good Hindu, I don't know whether any good Hindus are left, but when there is a good Hindu, he wakes up in the morning, before he puts his foot on the ground, he first folds hands to the earth. That I seek your blessing. I am putting my weight on you. I'm putting my foot on you. You see, at least my wife, who is a Vaishnavite, she does. And I always found it, I thought it is a good practice. I always try to follow it, but I always forget. And I put my foot down without any apology. And because earth is after all earth, it's not no more. It's not a mother. Because of my modern education. You see, I am an educated Indian. Educated Indians are disaffiliated Indians. Indians who have been disaffiliated from their own tradition and culture. And so morning, this is part of it. Morning when you get up, you see, there are two key concepts are there. There is a concept of reverence, Shraddha, Sanyama, Niyama, Shraddha. These are three very core values of Indian thought and Indian life and Indian practice. Niyam is a Mimamsa category. It simply means a preferred way of doing things. If there are two ways of doing something, you have one way. And that one way, preferred way, is one which promotes the welfare. And secondly, in the Sanyama is restraint. And if you have appetite for three loaves of bread, you eat only two, not three. You to keep your greed under control. You consume less. It is optimum rather than maximum. It is what is enough for you. What is enough for you? Moment it is enough for you, stop. You stop. And then reverence, Shraddha. Reverence for not only all human beings, reverence for all life, reverence for objects, reverence for nature, all the objects, reverence even for machines, reverence even for the fire which cooks your biscuits. So if you look at an ordinary baker, before he starts putting his trays inside, he first offers a prayer to the god Agni, He offers a prayer and first feeds the fire and then puts his tray there. Now there is a fundamental difference. There is no other in Indian thought. There is no other. The other, if at all it is there, it is inside you, because the metaphor for knowledge, you see, in the West, the metaphor for knowledge is power, and it comes from Moses, it comes from Deuteronomy, where that the fowl of the air and the fish of water are for you to enjoy and exercise dominion over them, exercise power over them. And as you know, the West is always obsessed with exercising power over others. But we don't believe that knowledge is power. Our metaphor is knowledge is a purifier. It purifies yourself. So you have power, but power over your own self. Gita says, you are your own friend, you are your own enemy. That enemy is the other. It is inside you. The other is not outside you. And you see, the sadhus and sannyasis, the Jain munis, who walk all through, they always walk barefoot, because there is a reverence for all life, The second point I would like to make is that in the individual daily life, there are very, very simple concerns. For example, you see, what we have done is, when we want something which is a good social or human practice, it is good for individuals, good for human beings, we put that, we elevate it into the category of dharma, a part of dharma, so that, as dharma, people are more ready to observe that practice if it is part of dharma, rather than if you tell them that it is good for the environment. So, for example, every morning a housewife waters the plants. Waters, particularly tulsi, is taken care of, because tulsi is a fragile plant. Heat spoils, destroys it. Too much winter destroys it. So looking after the plants in the morning, and the sanctity of some plants. With the first concept I said is one of reverence. The second concept is one of sanctity. Sanctity. It is. I have to use the word sacredness, but our word is punya. पुण्य, धरती पुण्य है, धरती के ऊपर जो भी है वो पुण्यात्मक है, उसको सॉइल नहीं करना, उसको खराब नहीं करना. You have to restrain yourself, and you have to ensure that. I remember my grandfather, that if in the evening somebody touched a flower or a plant, he would say, why are you touching it now? It is also sleeping. Even the plant sleeps. Don't disturb them at this time. So you see, there is life all around, and it is not, there is that Jad Chetan Prakriti. Although we do divide taxonomy because we are scientific people, so we objects which do not move, left or right, we consider them inanimate, and objects which move, we consider them as objects having life. But in fact, there is nothing jada. Everything has chaitanya. Everything has consciousness. Everything, even metal has consciousness. Even metal, and although we don't see it because we see it over long period, we go back to something made of metal 20 years later, and you find there is rust on it. Its color has changed. So there is something. Then, taking from earth, we have a concept of whatever you take from Mother Nature, you have to return it. The concept of rin, we have a concept of rin. It is central to us. Whatever you take from your pitra, from your elders, you have to return it. Whatever you take from your friends, you have to return it. Whatever you take from the earth, you have to return it. You have to give it back. And that is why, you see, the Green Revolution failed. It failed in a way because it did give you more food. It gave you more food, but it gave you so much of diseases, so much of your whole shift of philosophy. We have in our Puranas the story of Raja Prithu, the Prithu Dak, what is today Pihova in Pihova near Thaneswar and near Kurukshetra. Prithu was the king, and it is said, उसने 5 बार धरती का दोहन किया. He exploited this earth 5 times, so much so that drought followed and Saraswati river disappeared. Now that, of course, we have a legendary mode of making statements. It is in that legendary mode that it is when you exploit nature, when you exploit, now only for for some certain kilograms of gold, we are going to cut 1,50,000 trees in Madhya Pradesh, because for us gold is more precious than the tree, and that is where our mind has gone wrong. We have become un-Indian. We have become un-Indian. In the Bishnoi community in Rajasthan, you cannot cut a tree, because cutting a tree amounts to murder, and you will be given the same punishment as you get for murdering a man. In the Chipko movement in Garhwal, the women, they just embraced the trees, and they would not let that go. They would not allow people to cut the trees, because it is all part of dharma. You see, it is part of dharma. Religion, nahi, not religion, dharma. Dharma is a much larger category, very different category. It is one of the purusharthas also, and like dharmartha kama moksha, where it means righteousness, and dharma in Bhagavad Gita means duty, and so on. So we will not allow ourselves to be led by greed, and we will, earlier in agriculture, a farmer used to have two crops, and in between the two, he used to have a crop of a plant which gave nitrogen to earth. So earth was given back something that was taken from the earth in the two crops. Today you have five crops. You give back nothing to the earth. You simply take away. And we are turning arable lands into acidic lands, and we are turning, Amrit like water, nectar like water of the five rivers of Punjab, which goes into underground. That water we are turning into poison. So that is greed. Then in ceremonies and rituals, for example, the people tree. There is a in UP and Bihar and Bengal. The women on a particular day, they tie a thread around the people, and that day the men, they put their head against that people, because people also stands for long life, and it stands because it gives oxygen all the time. It gives oxygen. It gives you life. So it is sacred. It is sacred in the sense it is a dharma. It is a epitome of dharma. Doing things for others. What is dharma? Dharma is doing things for others. Parajan hitaye. Parajan hitaye. वो सुख है, not स्वयं हिताय or स्वयं सुख पाए. If you go looking for happiness for yourself, you never get it. Only when for others. So that kind of, there are many customs. You see, the moment even these days when people cross the Ganga in the railway train, they throw some coins into the river. You know what for? Right from the beginning, because the fishermen and the small people who clean the river, poor people who live around, their sustenance comes. They pick up those coins and they live. They sustain themselves. So even today, people who are not touched by modern education, they do this even today. And I made the point about consciousness. I must remember again that everything has consciousness. First of all, unlike the Cartesian separateness of reality in the Western system, where everything is separate from the other, we have continuity. We have continuity of life, continuity of everything. And that's why Brahman is simply energized matter, all matter which is energized, whether it takes the form of iron, or it takes the form of a tree, or it takes the form of a bird, or it takes the form of a human being. And because Brahman is inside, immanent, therefore, and everything and anything is sacred for us. And because the Abrahamic God is outside the creation and observer, therefore, everything is not sacred. No life is sacred, because the God here, the Brahman, pervades, is immanent. And the consciousness, I will not now spend more time because I think I'm taking too much time. There are 4 levels of consciousness. There is Jagrat Avastha, Nidra, Sushupti, and Turiya. So all these 5 correspond to different forms of life. For example, now at this time, this is Jagrat Avastha. Jagrat Avastha. But the plants are in plants are in Nidra Avastha. Nidra Avastha. And some of the yogis and saints, when they are in deep meditation and they seem to even forget to breathe, they are in Sushupti. And in the state of enlightenment, like Lord Buddha, you are in the state of Turiya, the highest consciousness. So we can divide the entire Prakriti into different levels. Chetana is there, Chitta, Chetana, Chaitanya. And I will just conclude by, and the Jain, I'll just mention Jain philosophy, which is the culmination of, non-violence towards all life, all forms of life, including the environment, including the sky, the air, the water, and everything. They say that stopping the natural flow of a river or a stream is hinsa, it is violence. And stopping a plant or a tree from growing naturally is hinsa, violence. As you know, today we are in bonsai culture. Everything is small. We make a huge people into a 4-inch plant. And I think our civilization itself is a bonsai civilization. For all the tall claims we make about artificial intelligence and other things, it's a bonsai civilization compared to one which produce such large body of knowledge by sitting in the open sky under the trees, not in air-conditioned rooms, but under the trees, and created the world's largest body of knowledge. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
अभी हम इस कार्यक्रम में अगले इसमें मैं हमारे असिस्टेंट कोऑर्डिनेटर श्री अनुराग जी से अनुरोध करता हूं कि इस कार्यक्रम के मुख्य वक्ता का परिचय करवाएं। श्री अनुराग जी।
Thank you, Sanjay ji. I'm privileged to introduce Michel Daninoji on this occasion. French-born Michel Danino has lived in India since 1977. A student of Indian civilization, he has written on proto-historical India, the lost river on the trail of the Saraswati in 2010, and Indian culture, that is Indian culture and India's future in 2011. Since 2011, he has been teaching courses on Indian civilization and knowledge systems at IIT Gandhinagar, where he is visiting professor and has been assisting its Archaeological Sciences Center. Daninoji was a member of Indian Council of Historical Research for 3 years since 2015 to 18, and is currently a member of the Indian National Commission for History of Science. He is also convener of CBSE committee for the course Knowledge Traditions and Practices of India, and co-edited with Professor Kapil Kapoor, who is our chief guest of today's webinar, its 2-volume textbook. In 2017, the Government of India awarded him Padma Shri for his work on education and culture. I request Daninoji to deliver his talk on the topic Concept and Practices of Environmental Conservation in Ancient India. What can we learn from them? Sir.
Namaste. Thank you, Anuragji. Thank you to all members of the IKS cell of the Ministry of Education for inviting me. Many thanks and much gratitude to Professor Kapil Kapoor, with whom I've been privileged to work for many years. You just mentioned the Knowledge, Traditions and Practices of India textbook for CBSE, and that was one major work which, under his guidance and detailed work, which we were able to put together. So Kapilji has done my task much easier in a way, also much more difficult in another way, because I am not sure what I can really add to his brilliant exposition and summary of India's attitude to nature. But let me try to make just a few brief points, skipping over things which he has already developed so eloquently. I will share a few slides to illustrate maybe what lessons we can draw from India. I hope that my slides are visible. Can you kindly confirm?
Yes, they are.
Very well. So, I'm getting an echo. I hope it will not continue. Right.
I think I'll
So
switch off the, maybe switch off.
you could mute yourself, Kapilji. It might help. It might help. Thank you. Let me start with. But why is this? See, we are in the IKS, Indian Knowledge System, cell of the ministry, and we may ask, what has this got to do with the Indian knowledge system? So there is no single knowledge system that could be called environmental conservation in ancient India. It is actually at the intersection of many. I've just mentioned a few. I will not elaborate to save time. And there could be many more, like botany, zoology, all those disciplines, those shastras, which were studied meticulously. And of course, branches of these, like Ayurveda has a veterinary branch. It has Vriksha Ayurveda for plants and trees and so on. So there were many shastras, and all of them, the intersection of all of these constitute environmental conservation in modern terms. Why do I mention Arthashastra here? Because, as we will see very briefly, there are lots of injunctions about how to manage a forest, how to manage wildlife, how to manage, how to fine people if a tree is damaged unnecessarily. Why do I mention Shilpa Shastra? Because this will govern the techniques of water structures, for example, constructing water management, efficient water management structures that will allow us to use natural resources without wasting them. So all these concepts are very strong, very well developed, systematically developed, and therefore it is legitimate to speak of a knowledge system here, or the intersection of many knowledge systems. So Kapilji has already spoken about the radical difference between the Abrahamic or Semitic or Judaic concept and the Indian ones. I'll simply add a few symbols at work. First of all, the symbol of the universe as a 1,000-branch tree. This is in the Rig Veda. I have given the mantra numbers if anybody wants to check. And this is a powerful symbol because the universe becomes a tree. That means it has a single trunk, it has one set of roots, but it has many in its manifestation, infinite diversity of branches and twigs and leaves and so on. So this symbol is going to be amplified, as we'll see briefly. And then this radical concept of earth and heaven being one. There is no difference, there is no hierarchy, as Kapilji explained. They are one and the same. And this Dyava Prithvi, this single deity which becomes a fused Godhead in the Rig Veda, is something that recurs again and again. They are twins. Together, they keep the creatures safe. They are father and mother, and there is no difference in level in hierarchy between the two. So this is just a reminder of what Kapilji explained, and it's fundamental to explain. Now, see how the symbols are amplified in later phases of Vedic knowledge and practices, what we can now call classical Hinduism, if you like. I'm not very keen on particular terms, it doesn't matter. But you see, in Mahabharata, for example, we are told explicitly, he who worships the Ashwatha, the people tree, worships the universe. So the tree is clearly the cosmos, the universe itself. And that is why in many temples you have to circumambulate the tree. What are you doing actually? You are going around the universe. But you know, it will take quite a bit of time if you want to do it actually. It is much simpler if you use a symbol like the tree. And similarly, why do you wrap a thread, a string, around a tree like you can see on the photo here? It is not a prayer to the tree, it is a prayer to the universe and the powers of the universe. So these symbols are powerful, they are still with us, but we have to understand them properly. And of course, the wish-fulfilling tree, Kalpavriksha, Kalpataru, and so on. And then many images that derive from this initial symbol. I am picking up this single Subhashita. There are many others. Trees are like good people. While they themselves stand in the scorching sun, they provide shade and fruit for others. So lovely images will follow out of this symbol. There are, of course, infinite representation of this symbol in art, in Indian art, right from the Harappan tree on a platform on the left to Buddhism and, of course, in Hinduism, Jainism also endlessly. On the right, you can see the peepal tree under which Buddha achieved illumination. And here the Buddha is sitting on the throne, except that he is not present. His presence is evoked, but it is placed below the tree purposely. The tree is not just a shade providing a device, it is again the symbol of the cosmos. It is a cosmic realization that we are given here. So these symbols will be all pervading. And similarly, other symbols like the cow is what feeds us, therefore it is the earth, it is nature, ultimately it is again the cosmos. And these symbols are very strong in the whole of literature and art history. At some point in the Mahabharata, the earth becomes a cow and all species, gods, humans, demons, animals, and so on, go and milk her in turn. So we can milk the earth, but we should not destroy the cow that provides the milk. So this is also very clear in the symbolism of Krishna, with the, playing with the cows welcome him and so on. This looks like a very idyllic pastoral image. Not at all. It is the same old Vedic metaphor put in a different language and iconography, if you like, but it is the same thing. It is that love story between what creates and what is created, and there are essentially no differences. So in mythology also, you will have Bhudevi elevated to the rank of Lakshmi. Here you see Bhudevi. Lakshmi is in the other corner of this photograph. It is not visible, but it is there in the opposite corner. And they are both wives, equal wives of Vishnu, the creator. So again, there is no difference. We have to understand these symbols. They are powerful, and these thoughts have pervaded all of Indian literature. We can pick it up from many strands. There's no time to do so. It has been done in many books. I like personally, because I spent a long time in Tamil Nadu, and we have the Tirukkural of Tiruvalluvar there, which is full of very profound thoughts. For example, sparkling water, open space, hills and forests constitute a fortress, our defense. Why? Why should Tirukkural in 1300 years ago, perhaps, or 1400 years ago, when nature was not threatened, give us this message? So it is a great foresight, and we have to meditate upon it. The river also is a powerful symbol. And of course, here we have Ganga and Yamuna standing on two reptiles. We will come back to them in a minute. The gharial or crocodile, water crocodile, and the tortoise for Yamuna. And they are deities, they are deified, they carry this water, these sacred waters. At the same time, they feed us, and they feed the entire civilization, because the Gangetic civilization was one of the main river-based civilization of the world. So all this awareness, all these symbols are very well understood. They are reflected, for example, in the concept of Saraswati, which begins again in the Rig Veda, extolled for inspiring us, impelling our thoughts, and in the Yajur Veda, openly as the goddess of speech, which is the same thing essentially, and ultimately the goddess of knowledge, later on the arts, education, and so on. So this is preserved in many ways, for example, in transferring the memory of the disappeared river that Kapilji evoked at Peowa, for example, all the way to Prayag in the Triveni Sangam, so that the memory of that river may be retained. So there are many such stories which can be said. Much more concepts could be picked up from Indian art. For example, these apparently these snakes, but they are powers also in many sculptures, and these snakes, these powers of nature, are worshipped in Indian rituals and practices. The concept of Vahana, I will not dilate upon it, it is too well known, but I want to highlight that there are big mammals, like here, elephant, tiger, lion. We have seen the reptiles with Ganga and Yamuna, but there are also birds. and there are even rats. So you can see the intention here in integrating all of nature. All animals have their place, all can be harnessed, or let us say rather associated with divinity, with various godheads. Then practices. So the concepts we have seen very briefly, but Kapilji had brilliantly exposed them. Then it's not as if we cannot use nature. We can use nature, but there are certain conditions of respecting, of not harming. And these texts are full of practices. So there's a lot in Indian literature about water structures, tanks and wells, but then there is a distinction, because the well allows us to draw from nature, the tank allows us to give back to nature. And therefore, you will earn, and many texts say that, 100 times more punya if you build a tank rather than if you build a well. So this has to be well understood. And Shiva Purana laments that one of the many signs of Kali Yuga is that the merchant class, because of course the traders are those who have the wealth, the artha, they are those who must give back to the society, but they have abandoned the holy rites of digging wells, tanks, and planting trees and parks. So this is one of the signs of Kali Yuga, that we are neglecting those holy duties. There are many more inscriptions across India. I will skip this one, but which reminds us of our duty to all the creatures and to creating, you see the last sentence, those who construct such reservoirs will earn the punya of performing the Ashwamedha sacrifice, one of the highest sacrifices in the Vedic tradition. So this is all pervasive. We find it also, of course, in Ashoka's edicts. This is too well known to spend time on it, but we know how Ashoka wanted to limit hunting, limit consumption of meat in his own kitchens, and encourage the population at large to practice this dharma. And he boasted, we don't know to what extent, of course, it is true, but let us take his intention at least, that he had ordered medical treatments to animals at regular intervals throughout his kingdom, his empire, and even beyond. This is echoed in Kautilya, and again there are forest sanctuaries and where animals are protected from slaughter. There is care given to animals when they are diseased, also to diseased plants. And as I said earlier, various systems of fines to be applied to those who do not respect these injunctions. Even those who harm a tree are to be fined. And Kautilya spends a lot of time on this. The Bishnois, Kapilji had evoked them, and this is absolutely one, what shall I say, tragic but inspiring example of how this community was founded on principles of respect of nature, reverence to nature, and the fact that even if a tree is saved at the cost of one's head, it is worth it. So I shall not repeat the historical incident. It is well documented of how over 300 of them, beginning with one woman, her name has been preserved, Amrita Devi, and her 3 young daughters sacrificed their lives to protect trees, until the Maharaja of Jodhpur heard what had happened. It was, of course, not his intention, and apologized and gave this edict, which is still in force, that in Bishnoi villages, the cutting of trees and hunting of animals is prohibited. So there are such examples and traditions across India, and they are worth documenting. And I think it should be one of the efforts of the IKS cell of the ministry to compile all this from, and there are already many publications. For example, the tradition of sacred groves. This is from Tamil Nadu. They are all over the Western Ghats, and these groves are not to be touched by human activities. There should be no hunting, no cutting of trees, and there will always be some shrines or some icons. For example, these terracotta horses here in Tamil Nadu, which are ritually broken every year and then reinstalled. Fresh statues will be installed. This repeats the cycle of nature going to sleep, almost dying, and then taking rebirth every year. So these are beautiful traditions, which of course are being lost. Tribal traditions of many kinds. These are the Toda tribals of the Nilgiris, which are well in tune with the preservation of nature. It is actually one tribe which observes strict vegetarianism, does not even practice agriculture. And Kapilji, who is a linguist, will be interested to know that the Todas have, in their own language, which is a very unique language, they have a word for a name for every single plant in the Nilgiris, every single. Whereas the Tamils, who are later comers to the Nilgiris, have names only for about 1/3 of the plants. For 2/3 of the plants, they do not have any vocabulary, but the Todas will have. So this itself shows us the depth of their connection with nature. We have to learn from them. They do weather prediction. They even do psychological analysis. There is a small flower, and I was personally witness to this. If they put it in your hand, if the flower closes up, they will say that you have too many worries. And if it does not, and I've seen the flower in different hands of different people, sometimes closing and sometimes not closing. So their explanation is that it depends of the level of your worry. How much worries do you actually carry? There are many other beautiful traditions that they have, but we will not spend more time. And of course, water structures, wells, and reservoirs all the way to the Harappan civilization. This is from Gujarat. Massive storm water drains in Dholavira so that every single drop of rainwater could be harvested and kept for the city. So a lot of planning, a lot of thinking, and all the way to the historical period. Again, I will skip the details. Kautilya meticulously documents the various water structures and also the various taxes associated with them. Because if the farmers have prepared the water structures themselves, they will have a much lower rate of tax than if those water structures are provided by the state. And there is also a distinction made between those that are uphill and those that are downhill. And the water structures uphill should not disturb those that are downhill. So a lot of thinking, a lot of planning, and also very crucially, we have to understand this because this has been the key to the success of water management in India. In a nutshell, community involvement. The fact that there were specific communities assigned the duty of constructing the water structures, other communities had to maintain them. And this is what was broken by the British Raj. British Raj took over the administration of the villages and said, now you keep away, we will install public works department and they will take care of all these water structures, which of course they could never do. And everything broke down. For example, the interconnectedness of reservoirs and channels within a few decades was destroyed. And whatever ponds remained were isolated instead of connecting with other ponds, as was the case before. There was siltation, there was growth of vegetation, there was encroachment, and so on and so forth. So this is something which we have still not really studied in depth, the extent of community involvement and how the community structure was indispensable for the maintenance and the good working of these extensive water structures all over India. There are so many, I will not show them in detail. There's some of them go back to the early historical period, like in Shringverpur here in Uttar Pradesh, the place where, according to Ramayana, Rama, Sita, Lakshmana crossed Ganga, and when excavations were made, a very elaborate water structure of interconnected tanks was discovered by Professor Bibilal. This is Gran Anicut in Tamil Nadu, which is miscalled a dam. It is not a dam. And actually, water structures in India were very rarely dams. If at all, they were low dams. They would not impound much water. This is not actually a dam. It doesn't impound any water. It simply diverts part of the Kaveri River to the lower basin so that more irrigation could be obtained, and something like 70,000 acres of rich farmland were irrigated through the help of this device. There are many more very elaborate structures which there's no time to describe, but here in Madhya Pradesh, in Burhampur, there was a lot of thinking given to the fact that a hillside was available. And once you have a hillside next to a city, then you can have far more elaborate structure capturing the runoff water and diverting it to lakes and ponds like this one, if you can see my cursor, which appear to be natural lakes. They are not at all natural, they are artificial, and you can have much more preservation of fresh water in this sense. You still have the Tapti River flowing by, but you see during the medieval era, sometimes there were fears that rivers could be poisoned upstream and that the population could suffer as a result. So an independent water supply was critical despite the presence of the river. There would be much more to say. I will skip some details. Water harvesting is extremely elaborate in forts because forts are vulnerable to water shortage even long before food shortage during a siege. So a lot of thought again was given to how to save every single drop. And there are multiple examples from Rajasthan, Maharashtra, and other parts of India for such water structures. This is another view from Gujarat. The small Saraswati river that flows down from the Aravalli hills, and where you have a settling pond here. You see the water comes here from the Saraswati and it settles down because the outlet which is here, it is at a higher level, and therefore the water has to stop for a while. And as it stops, the mud deposits and settles down. So you will have purer water flowing out into such channels here. And at the same time, during the dry season, you can desilt the tank and you will get very rich soil which you can use in the field. So all of this is a very complex system which has multiple advantages. Plus, these water structures are not secular with big quotation marks. We like to distinguish between secular architecture and sacred architecture. There is no such distinction in ancient India. And even a well like the fabulous Rani Ki Vav at near the place we just visited, near Patan, is actually a work of sacred art. And you have something like, there used to be at least 1,000 statues, not only in the cylinder of the well like here, but also on each side of the huge stairs that lead down to it. So this is a reminder that wells are not just utilitarian structure. We must revere the water, we will be drawing the water, but we must remember that we are interacting with nature, which is essentially sacred. Tanks, of course, multiple tanks across India, and enormous step wells such as here in Rajasthan, which again fulfill multiple functions. You can draw water from them, but you will also be able to have much cooler meeting places because of the evaporation taking place. So all these step wells of Rajasthan and Gujarat are places where communities would assemble in the evening, discuss, chat, gossip, whatever, but they would have a cooler place to do so, and therefore there is a social aspect to it. Plus, of course, complex architectural knowledge behind them. Dams, this is near Delhi, the famous Anong Podam. It is 1,200 years old. It is still there. I do not think that the dams we are constructing today at great cost and very low usefulness, if at all, are going to last for 1,200 years. So this is by King Anong Pal, and it is still visible on the margins of Delhi and built meticulously, but it is a much more complex structure than we might think. And we had here at IIT Gandhinagar an IIT professor, Professor Srinivas Viravalli, one day explaining the complexity of the system. Similar complexities are visible in interconnecting tanks in many river basins of India. This is the Pala River of Tamil Nadu, where you have hundreds of tanks. But again, the interconnectedness means that if a place receives more rainfall than another, the excess water can be passed on to areas with deficient rainfall. So a lot of thinking, and again, these systems have not been systematically studied. Here, this Chitra Krishnan did actually her PhD at IIT Delhi studying such water structures, but we need many more such studies. And even, let us not forget, even very humble systems like these bamboo irrigation systems from the northeast, where you have these half bamboo slits running for kilometers. All that you need to do is to adjust properly the level of your open bamboo pipes, and they will be interconnected for kilometers, and this is sufficient to irrigate your fields. So sometimes you do not need huge structures, you do not need big dams, you do not need, sometimes low-tech, or what we derogatively call low-tech, is sufficient to meet the needs of the population. So we all know now what is awaiting us. I will not spend too much time painting a dark picture, and probably it is even darker than we can imagine. But there is global warming, there is pollution, there is deforestation, extinction of species, pollution, impact on our health, overconsumption. Some organizations have calculated that we will soon be using the resources of 2 planets, but we are living on only 1. So all these are now well known: change in monsoon pattern, Ganga and Yamuna being seasonal. Even the flow of Ganga is already so impeded by a ridiculously excessive number of dams that in some places there is no more river flowing already now. Groundwater depletion and severe loss of agricultural production. We are not sufficiently aware. Here, I must say, there is more awareness in the West than in India. We are, we are earlier in the curve of awareness, and we are still not able to reconcile our desire for development, our legitimate desire that poorer sections of the society should have access to basic infrastructure and healthcare and food and so on. So basic development and at the same time preservation of the environment. This is a major challenge in India, and until the environmental awareness builds up to a much higher level, we will not be able to meet the challenge. So of course some people, and Sundarlal Bahugunaji passed away very recently, and Kapilji evoked his movement, Chipko movement, so I will not spend more time. We have people like Rajendra Singh, the Watermen of Rajasthan. They have all tried hard to marry Anna Hazare in his district in Maharashtra. All of them, Anupam Mishra, and also Swami Sanand, who was a professor at IIT Kanpur and who sacrificed his life for the preservation of Ganga. They've all tried in many ways, and there are many more whom I cannot mention today, to marry the ethos of India towards nature and this whole conceptual framework and practical framework that Professor Kapil Kapoor has exposed earlier with the urgent needs of India, with the realities of India. Our policymakers have not been listening. And for example, Sundarlal Bahugunaji, led this movement against the Tehri Dam long ago, but the Tehri Dam was built. And the Tehri Dam, how much benefit it will bring in the long run is a moot question. And probably we've been harming the whole Himalayas much more than we have brought benefits. And even the 2 catastrophes of Uttarakhand with the massive loss of life has not yet taught us the lesson. So there is here a fundamental problem where we will have to go back to the Indian thought systems, practices, because it was not only theoretical, it was not only conceptual, and this is something that India will have to ponder again And in a way that, you know, we should not be looking at those involved in environmental issues as enemies of the state, adverse, you know, opposed to all modes of development. It is not the case. There have been alternatives proposed, and our policymakers have not been listening sufficiently. Let me sum up and close now. We have a certain Indian way, Indian ethos, and it can be summed up in this very simple subhashita. One may own 100 cows, but his need is only 1 cup of milk. One may own 100 villages, but his need is only 1 morsel of food. One may own 100-room palace, but his need is but 1 cot. All the rest belongs to others. So this path of moderation, of taking from nature only what we legitimately need, has been the Indian approach. But we are hypnotized by the Western concept of consumption, whereas Ernst Schumacher, the author of this very important study, Small is Beautiful, Ernst Schumacher said long ago that the error of the West has been to put consumption at the center. We must remove consumption from the center. We must put the human being at the center. And he called this Buddhist economics. Buddhist economics is the term he used. He said, do not put consumption at the center, because then it will be an endless road to excess consumption until the planet can no longer sustain it. He said this in 1971, when nobody was prepared to listen. So more and more people realize that we have lost many decades. Maybe it is not too late, but then we have to understand the whole philosophy. This Indian philosophy or Indian approach has been picked up by many thinkers across the world. This, for example, David Suzuki simply repeats the Indian concepts here. When you say that if you look at a mountain as a deity, but not as a mere pile of ore, if you look at the river as a vein of the land, not as just irrigation water, if you look at a forest as a sacred grove, not just as a source of timber, and so on and so on, then we will treat each other, nature and humanity, with greater respect. This is exactly the Indian perspective. So many thinkers now echo it, but there is still a great gap with the actual practices that, you know, the world of business is demanding. This is another example. Books have come out in the West, picking up ideas from Indian ethos, and this Bruce Rich authored recently a book based basically on Ashoka and Kautilya. So the West is picking up, but we are getting more and more distanced, as Kapilji said, from these concepts. We have a lot of work to do to close the gap, and I will close with my own list of lessons for nature conservation. They are very simple. First of all, restore the sacredness of nature. Nature is not distinct from us. It is not distinct from the divinity either. It is all one and the same. Let's remember that creatures are interdependent. When we hear that the rate of extinction of species is between 1,000 and 10,000 times faster than at any given time in the past, we should lose our sleep. We are not. So we do not understand what ancient India said, that all creatures are the whole web of life is one. And we cannot afford to lose any strand of that web of life. Let's keep our needs under control, of course. Development must respect the environment is something that all our politicians have been saying for decades, and none of them almost has tried sincerely to practice this. And let's get involved before we get extinct. All of us can do something. It is not true that we are helpless. We are not helpless. Whether it is segregating our waste, whether it is reducing our consumption, whether it is making sure that we don't buy unnecessary plastics, that we don't shop with plastic bags, we can all do something on our scale, and there is much more. And this is my request to the IKS cell of the Ministry of Education. Please ensure that all this knowledge, all these practices of India, they have been documented extensively, people have written books, are integrated, of course, in a very brief and inspiring manner for our children. we should not simply have lessons of ecology. Ecology so far in India has been the scientific approach. It's good to know botany. It's good to know a little bit of zoology. Yes, it's good to know the cycles of nature. But ecology in India is again the sacredness of nature before anything else, and then the rest, the scientific knowledge can follow. Until this is put at the center, we will not be able to create a more enlightened generation of Indians as far as interacting with nature is concerned. So we should integrate this at all levels in a very, very simple way, even with stories at primary education level, all the way to college education, where we can say, for example, have technical studies of our ancient water structures. So there is much to be done, and I will close with this request that education has to acknowledge this vast field of knowledge of ancient India, and we must benefit from it. We must learn to practice it as much as possible. Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you very much, sir. We have a question from our YouTube viewers. There is a question: environmental conservation in ancient India can guide us for our future plans.
Well, I think I've already answered. I need not take time. Yes, it can. Of course, the conditions are different. We acknowledge that the population is perhaps 100 times what it was in the time when those ancient water structures or forest sanctuaries were practiced. But still, India is vast, and we can learn first. See, unless the central attitude is changed, nothing will ultimately change. We may try to experiment with a few water structures here and there. We may try to protect our forests a little better, but it is all a question of attitude. So that is the central thing which has to change. Our philosophy, our approach to nature has to change. Once that is changed, I am sure that many solutions will become apparent, and many already are apparent. So yes, we can radically improve matters if we first of all change our minds and understand what it means to interact with nature, and the fact that we are not here to exploit nature. Even this word exploitation of nature should be banned from our vocabulary. Nature allows us to take what we need, but we are not supposed to exploit beyond this. For example, opening mines in India, and Kapilji alluded to the recent new mine for gold in Madhya Pradesh, opening mines simply to export our ore to other parts of the world should not be part of our policies. We should take exactly what we need and not more. And even what we need will be much reduced if we understand what our consumption really should be. So my answer is yes, we can absolutely harness the ancient way to the modern problems.
Thank you, sir. There is one more question. Do you agree that Indian indigenous science is mother of modern sciences?
This is a different topic altogether. It's a complex one. I don't think we should go into this because the answer is both yes and no. In some respects, yes. In some respects, no. I would simply like to caution against reading all of modern science in ancient Indian or Chinese or Mesopotamian or Greek science. No, of course not. But certain fundamental ideas were there, certain fundamental concepts, and some actual advances were there. We have to be very modest and realistic and scrupulous in studying this. And again, there we have many scholars who have studied rigorously ancient Indian mathematics, astronomy, medicine, botany, and so on. We have first of all to get to that scholarly material, and hopefully the ministry will be able to produce material which is more accessible to our student community, students of all ages, in fact. So you will see then that the answer to your question is yes and no. It depends.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir. It was so clear presentation, so there are no more queries or questions, sir. So we will wind up this session.
Can I ask a question? Can I ask a question?
Sir, please, sir.
Right. So, Professor Danino, thank you, and it is pleasure to listen to you always. So, one thing is that Ayurveda versus allopathy or this thing. So, Ayurveda is often considered to be more environment friendly, whatever that means. So, can you throw some light on this?
No, it is not a question of environment friendly. You see, I'm not an expert in Ayurveda, but I've practiced it for myself. And I continue to practice to the extent possible. And I have many friends in the Ayurvedic world, and I consult them often. It is again a question of philosophy. The philosophy of Ayurveda is extremely simple. It is that the human body and the cosmos function the same way. They are not different. The microcosm and the macrocosm are basically the same. It's a reduced scale. So once you understand this need to be in harmony with the cosmos, then the whole practice of medicine changes. And it is about restoring harmony. It's not about curing a disease. It's not about saying that, you know, if you sneeze too much, you should take this particular pill. So the whole philosophy is different. First of all, again, the central principles, central philosophy have to be understood. Then we can deal with the apparatus. Then we can deal later with, you know, how efficient Ayurveda may be to tackle a particular disease, and what are its strong points with regard to allopathy, for example. Are there diseases that Ayurveda cures better than allopathy? Yes, I'm convinced there are many. There could also be a few, and honest Ayurvedic practitioners may tell you that this particular disease, Ayurveda is not as efficient. I suggest you go to an allopathic doctor. So let us be again scrupulous, modest, but first of all, let's understand the central philosophy. Unless we do that, we're just wasting our time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद सर. समय को देखते हुए अभी हम यहाँ रुक रहे हैं.
Kapilji, would you like to have a last comment, Kapilji? One last comment I feel you should make.
Kapil sir, Kapil Kapoor ji.
You are muted. Kapilji, your mic is off.
I say I don't have any comment except to say thank you. Thank you for your usual clarity and comprehensiveness in treating a subject and making it very hard subject. You see, that is, you can clearly, if people don't do, I mean, they not because they don't understand now after what you have said, but because they just are not convinced that they should do anything, that they are so swept by what is so easy to do, which is all around you, rather than make a fundamental change. And as you rightly said, we need an entirely different mindset. In fact, the divide in India between the urban and the rural, and between the ruling class, which is educated, English educated, you see, and the masses, 90% masses who are not or not, you do not know English. 10 to 11% of people function in English, but they rule the people, rule the 89%. And that divide is, unless we do something to get rid of that divide. And the only way to get rid of that divide is to make Indian languages the medium of education rather than English, right from class 1 to the top. And of course, you know, people don't take it easily. We are very diffident about doing something which will reduce our comfort zone, because English is a comfort zone for a small number of people, and they don't get away. And you are arguing for recovering the Indian point of view. I'll just give you one example from CBSE. When we were preparing course on ethics, so we invited the topper of CBSE class 12, a girl, to the meeting. And she said, sir, please don't include any ethics like, you know, be honest and speak the truth. Because, you know, if you do that, people simply start laughing. People start laughing. That is how degenerate the society has become. Now, this is something whether you should be happy about, they have become so modern, or unhappy. The second problem You see, for these ideas, you need to take recourse to Indian classical texts. And they are generally texts which people sometimes deliberately characterize as Hindu texts. So if you teach ethics and take, let us say, there's something from chapter 16 of Bhagavad Gita, which are very general things, be kind and be patient. But if you take it from there, this is Hindu. And this cannot. So you cannot teach it in the. Now, if you can't teach Indian ideas in education, which you can't at present, and you are not doing it, then how do you think your mind will turn? Because the class which rules the people, comes from the class which is not taught these things. Nothing is taught. I don't know who will bell the cat, as they say, who will take that decision, important decision, that you have to get over this. I mean, if it's a Hindu text, so what? After all, everybody is a Hindu in this country. You see, staying this side of the river Indus, Sindhu, and the unnecessary fears that people have cultivated, the interested and vested people, we have to overcome them. Can you change the mindset without changing what you teach? You can't. Without bringing in the text which you are talking about, you have to bring those texts. And many things that you mentioned, or I mentioned as customs and practices, they are called superstitions. You see, tying a thread around people, putting your head against people, these are superstitions. What will you gain by that? So, as you said, change the mindset. Changing the mindset is not easy. You have to be drastic. Macaulay was very drastic. On 9th April, something March 1835, William Bentinck signed the Education Act, and within 1 month, everything was changed. All pathshalas, tolls, and other things, they went, madrasas, and everything. Unless you do that kind of drastic change suddenly, if you wait for people to be convinced, people will not be convinced.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for
Thank you, Kapil ji.
we are grateful for your comments. बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद सर. हमारे इस कार्यक्रम के मुख्य चीफ गेस्ट के रूप में उपस्थित होकर आदरणीय कपिल कपूर जी ने जिस गरिमा के साथ प्रास्ताविक भाषण दिया, उसी गरिमा के साथ इस समापन के अंतिम में अपने कमेंट्स को प्रदान करके हमें अनुग्रहित किए हैं. उसी प्रकार इस कार्यक्रम के जो मुख्य वक्ता के रूप में मिशेल डेनिनो ने अत्यंत स्पष्ट अपने क्लियर प्रेजेंटेशन के द्वारा इस विषय को हमें और स्पष्ट करवाया है, हमें अवगत करवाया है. और सर का जैसे आग्रह था कि उनके प्रतिपादित विषयों का जैसे डॉक्यूमेंटेशन होना और आगे इसकी प्रगति होनी चाहिए, तो जरूर सर इसका डॉक्यूमेंटेशन किया जा रहा है और इस विषय पे आगे का जो भी कार्यवाही है हम कर रहे हैं और इसके लिए आपका अत्यंत आभार है सर हम. और आगे इस कार्यक्रम में हमारे भारतीय ज्ञान परंपरा प्रकोष्ठ के मुख्य समन्वयक आदरणीय ए.बी. शुक्ला जी हमारे साथ उपस्थित है. सर का भी हम अत्यंत धन्यवाद ज्ञापन करते हैं. इस कार्यक्रम में और भी आईआईटी कानपुर से अर्णव भट्टाचार्य जी भी उपस्थित रहे हैं और आलोका पराशर सेन सेंट्रल यूनिवर्सिटी ऑफ हैदराबाद से भी रही हैं. सो आप लोगों का भी बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद. इसी प्रकार यूट्यूब के माध्यम से जितने भी हमारे श्रोता लोग जुड़े हैं, आप सभी का भी मैं धन्यवाद ज्ञापन करता हूँ. साथ में हमारे टेक्नीशियंस हमें इस कार्यक्रम को लाइव टेलीकास्ट करने के लिए जो सहयोग प्रदान किया, उनका भी धन्यवाद ज्ञापन करते हुए मैं इस कार्यक्रम को अंतिम रूप में समापन करते हैं. तो इस अंतिम में मंत्रोच्चारण के लिए मैं श्रेय जी को अनुरोध करता हूँ. इस मंत्रोच्चारण के साथ साथ हम कार्यक्रम का ये कर ले.
हरि ओम. संगच्छध्वं संवदध्वं संभोमनांसि जानताम् देवा भागं यथा पूर्वे संजानाना उपासते शान्ता पृथिवी शिवमन्तरिक्षं द्यौर्नो देव्यभयन्नो अस्तु शिवादिशः प्रदिश उत्तिशो न आपो विद्युतः परिपान्तु सर्वतः शान्तिः शान्तिः शान्तिः.
धन्यवाद.